Wow, welcome to Twickenham, where if I look to my right hand side, I look at the scoreboard, it reads England 22, Fiji 30, Fiji's first ever victory here at Twickenham against England, a result which plummets Steve Borthwick's side even lower ahead of the World Cup, which starts in just a couple of weeks' time. So much to get into in this video, so many of you will have your take as well, so drop it in the comment section down below. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel as well, because there is an awful lot to chat about following that performance and another defeat for England. Let's get into it. So it's getting almost a little bit difficult really to try and look at England and be constructive without saying the sack them all, sack the coaches, etc., which I'm sure many of you will feel, many of you will put in the comment section down below. What I do think this whole World Cup warm-up and preparation shows from England is they are underdogs when it comes to that first game at the World Cup. They are underdogs against Argentina, and at this moment in time I think you have to say that they are 50-50 or only marginal favourites to beat Japan. Possibly many of you would say that Japan would be favourites over England, and that is a indictment of where England are following these World Cup warm-ups, because it has been awful. Played 4 games, lost 3, and they've won 1, but frankly that victory here at Twickenham against Wales was far from convincing. There are a huge amount of question marks over this team. I am going to get on to England, obviously, as an England fan, and many of you will want to get into it because it's such a big story about how bad they're playing at the moment. Let's just pause for a moment and give credit to Fiji, because the story in an ideal world here would be that of Fiji. Their first victory against England, first victory here at Twickenham. And today was a great example of what they're trying to do right in Fijian rugby, in terms of what they're doing with the Fijian Drua in Super Rugby, having a actual viable professional team on the island to be able to help grow the game and give themselves a better chance of being successful at an international level. And slowly but surely, that I think is starting to have an effect. It's early days in that project, but you look at kind of what they're trying to do in terms of some of the basics. I heard Mark Evans, who is the CEO or director of rugby, I can't remember his exact title, of the Fijian Drua. He spoke on the Ruck podcast, the Times podcast, which I produce actually, on In the Week. We had Mark on, and he was talking about how ball retention is something they have improved. Their scrum is improving as well, and kind of those areas of the game that traditionally they've always not been as strong at. We've always known they'd be great with ball in hand, but they're trying to improve a lot of those other areas, and I think this was quite a good example of that, in the way in which they were able to stay in the fight and get the victory. And they did some brilliant stuff with ball in hand, as they always do. So it's a brilliant story for Fiji. The Fijian fans here will always remember the fact that they were here when they saw that famous victory. And Ravatumada, the right winger, I wanted to mention him. There are a lot of good performances from Fiji, but the right winger was outstanding. Even though Johnny May skinned him 8 minutes into the game for England's try, boy, that seems like a long time ago now. He was absolutely brilliant. We know how good Fiji are, and this sets them up really well. I know Warren Gatland and some of his coaches were here in Twickenham today. Wales play them in the World Cup in the pool stage. That is going to be a fascinating group, and Fiji will be full of confidence. But let's get on to England. Where do we start? I suppose let's start with what my main takeaway is, having been here and watched it in the flesh, which was as soon as things started going against England, after about 10 minutes or so, first 10 minutes, England looked great. They were on top, they had possession, they were in the red zone, their attack looked quicker, they were more threatening, they got themselves ahead on the scoreboard, and you're thinking, okay, here's maybe something in terms of the attacking structure that we're starting to see from England. Johnny May scored a try, a back scored a try for the first time in whatever it was, almost 6 hours the last time an England back scored a try, so things were going okay. But then the heavens opened, it absolutely chucked down, the ball got slippy, the game got scrappy, and they started to lose their grip on the game. And at that point, I thought it looked like a team who had such little confidence at the moment. I thought we saw an England team who are in the kind of form that we're currently witnessing them going through, and they weren't able to drag themselves out of that in time. It became an arm wrestle of a match, and they could never grasp control of it fully again, even though I know they scored some tries in the second half. And I think that is a direct reflection of that team being incredibly short on confidence, which is what we're seeing, and unfortunately seeing, as they embark on a World Cup campaign where they've got a tough test against Argentina first time up. And I think a good example of that is what I noticed being here was the players that were really trying to drive England on. And it's kind of ironic really that England have gone from being criticised for over celebrating, which I always thought, whilst the criticisms were kind of valid, it was a bit stupid, it was a little embarrassing celebrating a not straight line out. It was also blown out of proportion a little bit, in my opinion. Many of you may agree, but it's ironic that England have gone from that to what I saw today, where you were crying out for someone to drive them on. I was crying out for a Mara Itoje, or players in that team to be really driving them forward. And there were only 2 players that I could see do it on a really consistent basis. Number 1 was George Ford, and I'll circle back to George Ford because to me he looked like a fly half who realises that shirt is his at the start of the World Cup with Owen Farrell being suspended, and was looking to play that leadership role of the fly half that you expect. He was trying to drive them on, and so was Marcus Smith when he came on in the second half. He was consistently trying to drive up the energy and get them moving forward. But that to me is incredibly revealing. They lost confidence as the game started to get away from them. They didn't feel like they were fully controlling it, and that was reflected in the team with maybe, whether you call it a lack of leadership or players not being particularly vocal, it is a team such low on confidence. They are at rock bottom at the moment. But as I mentioned with George Ford, I do think he looked like a 10 that is looking to take his opportunity. I'm probably glossing or putting a positive spin on this really at the moment when, you know, it's not great from an England perspective, but he was vocal. He knows he's number 1. A lot of what England did in the good parts of that opening 10 minutes was down to Ford. So I think that will be a bit of a positive for England going forward, having him in that 10 shirt. But outside of that, I'm afraid there's a huge amount of question marks. A huge amount of question marks. I could probably get into more about Lawrence and Tuolangi, and in that opening 10 minutes how they kind of, one was wearing 12, one was wearing 13, but they alternated so much on what England did with their attack. But yeah, there's probably not too much point. Theo Dan, what do we make of him? Throwing in at the line out wasn't great, certainly at the start of that game. Freddie Stewart, let's have a conversation about Freddie Stewart at fullback, who I have always defended because I think he's been so good under the high ball, but it all kind of came crashing down for him today. He wasn't that good under the high ball. It was difficult conditions. I mentioned already how wet and slippy it was, and he was knocking it on, but he then does get exposed in attack at times, one-on-one as a 15. Some England fans have been saying it for a while. I've always thought how good he was in the air meant that you could kind of accept maybe a few, not even, I suppose, defensive deficiencies maybe, or more just a lack of pace in his defensive game. But he got exposed defensively today, and England heading into the World Cup, I'm sure many people will be saying Steve Borthwick and the coaches need to go. Is that going to make any difference at this moment in time? My biggest concern, as I say, is whether those players believe that they are able to start putting performances in. Because I still look at the England team sheet and I'm not expecting them to rip up any trees. I'm not expecting to have an England team at this moment in time, given where they've been, that could go on and win a World Cup. I'm not expecting that, but I'm expecting something more. And it was a huge, huge concern, the way in which their heads dropped, the way in which they didn't look confident unless they were fully bossing a game, which I suppose actually is something we've been saying about England for a while. Almost brilliant flat track bullies, brilliant when they are on top and dictating the game, but as soon as things aren't going their way, are they able to problem solve? And at the moment, on the evidence of what we saw today, what I saw today here at Twickenham, I think probably not. That's probably where I'll leave it for the time being. What it means for England at the World Cup, I mean, who knows? They've still got a kind draw. They are underdogs for the match against Argentina. I think that's absolutely the case. Japan's not going to be easy. Can they drag themselves out of the group? I think realistically, sitting here now, we're most likely going to be looking at a kind of 2011 World Cup campaign for England, where England are able to get out of their group, they don't look particularly great, and then they lose in a quarter-final. That's what I would expect sitting here now. Is there any chance they could do the 2007, rip up the playbook and somehow get themselves to a World Cup final? And none of us could say that with confidence with the way they're going at the moment. So drop your comment in the comment section down below. Like the video and make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. But that is my thoughts following this game here at Twickenham. I'll see you in the next one.